You're the 148,000er failure of this company, he bellowed across the cafeteria like a bad actor in a dinner theater version of Succession. Forks froze midair. I was halfway through a lukewarm chicken wrap, watching my iced tea do laps around its melting lemon slice, when the CFO, Greg, decided to make me his lunchtime sacrifice. He'd waited until the room was full. Of course he had. Plant workers, junior analysts, 2 VPs, even that new HR intern who still signs emails with emojis. Your role is redundant. Your attitude is toxic. Security's waiting, he said, smirking like he'd just cured cancer with a whiteboard. I stood up slowly, not in shame. No, that feeling had burned out years ago, somewhere between the third ignored audit and the time legal called me overcautious for flagging a vendor tied to a federal recall. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I reached under the table, lifted the cardboard box I'd packed that morning, just in case, and walked out past the vending machines. One of them clapped. I think it was sarcastic. I didn't turn to check. Inside that box, 2 framed certificates, a half-dead desk cactus, and 1 3-ring binder, our insurance policy and its endorsements. Greg had never read it. Most don't. But I had. Page by page, clause by clause, especially the juicy one. Endorsement 14B. Designated risk officer must be named and approved. Change of role requires written notice within 10 days, signature by name. I was that name. Still was. No replacement filed, no notice sent, no coverage valid. I'd highlighted the clause months ago, annotated it, even stuck a yellow sticky tab that said, "Do not screw this up, morons," in Sharpie. It fluttered like a flag of the damned as I shut the box. Before we go further, do me a small favor. If you're listening and you've made it this far, take 2 seconds to like this video and subscribe. 97% of people forget, but it seriously keeps the stories coming and keeps the team fueled. All it takes is a click and it means the world. Anyway, I walked to my car. Didn't cry, didn't scream. Just sat there, engine off, the box on my passenger seat, and stared at the factory smokestack disappearing into gray sky. This job was never glamorous. They gave me the risk officer role because no one else wanted it. Too dry, they said. Too many rules. Perfect for me, I guess. I'm a mid-40s woman in ops. Not flashy, not loud. But I read the damn fine print. I track the moving pieces. I don't chase the spotlight. I make sure it doesn't explode. And that morning, I knew exactly what had just exploded. Greg thought he'd cut a cost. But what he'd really done, what no one else in that cafeteria realized yet, was slit the company's brake line. He just didn't know the crash was already in motion. The walkthrough for our loss control audit was scheduled for tomorrow. Required the designated risk officer to be present. Without one, automatic red flag. I canceled the calendar invite and flagged it as terminated, unauthorized. I also withdrew my pre-cleared site notes from the portal. Let him wing it. In the hallway, as I passed the HR glass office, someone had scrawled "just vibes" on the whiteboard. Yeah. Good luck with that when the insurance carrier shows up and asks who the hell is responsible for controlling warehouse lithium-ion battery risks. Greg wanted applause. He might have even gotten it until someone opened the next email, the one from the carrier, the one that would ask a single, quiet, devastating question. And when they did, the entire building would stop pretending I didn't matter. I sat in my kitchen staring at the blinking cursor on my Outlook screen. Quarterly loss control walkthrough, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Normally, I'd be triple-checking the inspection checklist, coordinating the safety supervisor's notes, and nudging maintenance to mop the damn battery aisle so we don't lose another underwriter to a twisted ankle and a lawsuit. But tonight, I just hovered over the calendar event, clicked cancel, and typed 4 words into the decline reason. No longer authorized host. My finger didn't even shake. The tea kettle hissed in the background like it was trying to warn someone. I didn't bother pouring, just stood there in my jeans and hoodie, lit by the fridge light, watching the company's entire audit prep vanish from my laptop in a few keystrokes. I had a draft email from our rep at North River Mutual still sitting open. He'd sent over a polite reminder. Looking forward to tomorrow's walkthrough, as DR officer presence is mandatory. I replied with just one line. I no longer serve as the designated risk officer. No warmth, no signature, just facts. Then I closed the laptop and just sat. People think it's dramatic what happened, that I must have been fuming, crying, screaming into the void. But when you've worked somewhere that long, through 3 restructures, a warehouse flood, and a 6-month period where our forklifts caught fire every third Tuesday, you don't feel explosions. You hear the silence before them. I knew Greg didn't know what he'd done. Not yet. In his head, he'd just saved $148K and earned a round of applause from the board for streamlining operations. The plant would keep humming, the packing line would buzz, vendors would keep delivering, trucks would still load. But the fuse was lit. And somewhere in that steel and concrete tomb they call our distribution center, that fuse was snaking under the floor toward a very specific box, our insurance policy. Inside it, the conditions that allowed our entire operation to function legally. And endorsement 14B, the one with my name on it in actual ink, was the detonator. It wasn't just vanity. The carrier required a named DR officer for a reason. You don't move chemical products across state lines, store lithium batteries near thermal units, or run a 24/7 shift on recycled wiring unless you've got someone accountable for risk. Not hypothetically, not assigned internally. Named, approved, filed, changed only with notice. And Greg? Greg just pulled that pin on camera in a cafeteria with no plan and no clue. I poured the tea finally, drank it cold, then got up and pulled the file copy of our last compliance audit from my shelf. I didn't need to look at it. I knew what was inside. A handwritten note from the carrier rep sheet. Great site prep. DAYAR officer clearly knows the terrain. No one else did. They never asked. Never wanted to. Not until it burns. Upstairs, my phone buzzed with texts from coworkers. WTF happened? Are you okay? Did Greg really fire you in front of Julie from procurement? I let them pile up. I wasn't ready to answer yet. There was nothing to explain, at least not to them. But someone was about to start asking the right questions, the kind that required official answers. And tomorrow morning, when the plant manager stood at the loading dock with a clipboard and no signature, pretending everything was just fine, that little gap in the paperwork was going to open wider. And then wider still, because I wasn't the risk anymore. They were. At 9:17 a.m., a ping hit Greg's inbox while he was busy gloating to the ops team about cleaning house. Subject line, coverage. Status, pending, material change in risk personnel. 16 words into the carrier's email, his mouth stopped moving. Dear policyholder, it began, polite as a scalpel. Please confirm the name and start date of your current designated risk officer per endorsement 14B and indicate the date of written notice of change from the previously named individual. That's the kind of sentence you don't read once. You read it twice, slowly. The first time to pretend it's nothing. The second time because you just realized what you cut loose was the only person keeping the engine running legal. Greg said nothing at first, just stared at the screen like the words might shift into something nicer. They didn't. His face flushed, then drained, like someone pulled the plug, and then he snapped, loud enough for the hall to hear, "Get her on the phone, now!" But I already knew the email had landed. My former coworker Danny forwarded it with a subject line that just said, "Oh shit." I was sipping black coffee at my kitchen table in fleece pajama pants, watching the neighborhood squirrel try to mount a ceramic garden owl when my phone buzzed. Caller ID, blocked. Cute. I let it ring again. Then picked up on the third, mostly for the drama. "Hello?" I said, like I didn't already know who it was. Silence for a beat, then Greg's voice, trying too hard to sound composed. "Hey, quick question. Minor thing. Do you recall if we filed a formal change notice with the carrier when you left?" I smiled into my mug. "Nope." Another pause. "You sure?" "Positive. You fired me in a cafeteria, Greg. I wasn't exactly in the mood to help you fill out forms." He didn't laugh, didn't even fake it, just exhaled hard through his nose. "Okay, well, they're asking about coverage status. We're just trying to keep everything running smoothly." "Yeah, that's what 14B is for, to make sure things stay smooth," when followed. He knew it too. Endorsement 14B isn't a footnote, it's the seatbelt. And he'd cut it because he wanted a standing ovation for trimming dead weight. Now the truck shipments were already stalling. Not officially, not loudly, but our largest client, Serona Labs, had pinged our system an hour earlier asking for an updated certificate of insurance. That's routine during walkthrough weeks. only this time, they wanted it signed by the current DR officer, not interim, not TBD, not some operations deputy with a nervous smile and a forged timestamp. The carrier's question wasn't a courtesy, it was a trigger. They'd found out about the termination, probably from the canceled walkthrough notice I sent, and now they were pulling threads. I could hear it in Greg's voice. He wasn't asking me to fix it yet. He was still in the bargaining stage, hoping the sheer force of corporate confidence would make the issue evaporate. But insurance companies don't do vibes. They do signatures, names, dates, traceable audit trails. And his was empty. "I'll get back to you," he muttered and hung up. I could picture him already snapping at HR, digging through emails, trying to find anything that could fake a paper trail. But I knew what he'd find. Nothing. No filed notice. No successor named. No correction plan. Just a gaping void where compliance used to live. The audit rep wasn't even asking if they broke the rules. They were asking how badly, and this was the first drop in the avalanche. By 10:45 a.m., Greg was in a full-blown tailspin, but still trying to dress it up as leadership. Word spread that he and Nadine from HR had assigned the DR officer role to Curtis. Poor, panicked Curtis, who once asked me if material risk meant asbestos or just bad vibes. They printed out an old onboarding form, slapped a fresh date on it, and handed it to legal like a homemade hall pass. Legal didn't buy it. I knew they wouldn't. Brian from legal called Greg into his office with the kind of quiet tone that says, "We're all going to jail unless you stop talking." 10 minutes later, a new email popped up. One of those sanitized, corporate-scented announcements. Effective immediately, Curtis M. will serve as interim designated risk officer. No mention of backdating, no admission of a change, just vibes. Except the carrier doesn't do vibes, and neither does Sirona Labs. At 12:08 p.m., they replied to our updated COI with a casual dagger. Please confirm the named signatory aligns with the DR officer listed on file with North River per endorsement 14B. Any material discrepancy will require underwriter clarification. Boom. You ever watch a building collapse in slow motion? That was the inbox, because that one sentence meant Sirona had read 14B, or their legal team had. Either way, it was over. It wasn't just our insurance carrier watching now, it was the client whose quarterly shipments made up 31% of our revenue. And they were not about to risk unloading a multi-million-dollar payload on a policy dangling by a fraudulent signature and a sweaty HR memo. Curtis, bless him, tried to own it. He replied with a PDF that had been so obviously photoshopped, I half expected to see Clippy waving from the margins. Wrong font, wrong date, signature block blank. They'd recycled the header from my last COI and just changed the name. Amateur Hour. Sirona's reply was 3 words. Underwriter confirmation required. That was it. 3 words. But I knew the tone. That was corporate code for, we're not touching your product until the grown-ups show up. And that's when the scramble turned to silence. That suffocating hush that only comes when people realize the building's already on fire, but they're still arguing about who brought the matches. I didn't interfere. I didn't send a smug message. I just watched from my kitchen, coffee gone cold, emails trickling in from people I hadn't heard from in years. Hey, quick question. Just wondering if you've still got access to the audit logs. Can I call you real fast, like super fast? No, you cannot. They still thought I was the shortcut, the patch, the fixer, but I'd already handed them the fire extinguisher months ago, labeled it, highlighted the instructions, and now they were kicking it down the stairs asking why the flames wouldn't stop. Somewhere around 1:30, Greg made another attempt. This time, a mass-forwarded internal thread asking if anyone knew where the hard copy binder of policy endorsements had been stored. The binder that was currently on my bookshelf. The one with my sticky tab on 14B, with the Sharpie warning still screaming in all caps. I didn't reply. Didn't have to, because gravity had taken over. The audit flag was up. The carrier's underwriter team was awake. Sirona had fired the starting pistol. And legal? Legal was quietly calculating the cost of the clawback clause tied to preventable lapses in coverage. One client had asked the question. Soon, every other client was going to want an answer too. The call came at 3:12 p.m. on the dot. Not from Greg, not from legal, not even from HR. It came from a number I knew by heart. The direct line for Ava Landry, senior underwriter at North River Mutual. The voice on the other end was firm, unhurried, and surgical in its intent. Hi, this is Ava Landry. We're reviewing an active policy for Loring Industrial Systems, and your name is still listed as Designated Risk Officer under Endorsement 14B. Can I confirm, were you terminated yesterday? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the neighbor's trash can tipped over in the wind like some prophetic omen. I answered without drama. Yes. She didn't thank me, just followed with the next scalpel slice. Was written notice of change submitted prior to termination? No, I said, and took a sip of water I didn't need. No notice was filed. There was a long pause, but not the kind that begged clarification. This was the pause of paperwork finalizing itself in her mind. Clicks behind her told me forms were being updated in real time. Insurance professionals don't bluff. They prepare. Okay, Ava said. Coverage is now formally marked as suspended pending corrective plan and authorized sign-off. No policy actions will proceed until conditions are met. And just like that, the lights on their operation dimmed, even if no one at Loring had noticed yet. I asked, because I could. And just to be clear, who can sign off? Per your endorsement, either you or a documented successor approved by the board and acknowledged by our team. Another pause. But currently, you're the last approved officer on file. I let the silence hang. Somewhere between the bitterness and the vindication was something more satisfying. Certainty. They'd done this to themselves. I didn't leak anything. I didn't sabotage. I didn't manipulate or campaign. I just left. Quietly. Completely. Cleanly. And their entire regulatory scaffold came down behind me like a theater set with one missing screw. Ava began listing the corrective requirements like she'd done it 100 times before. 1. Formal appointment of a successor approved by board resolution. 2. Submission of a written corrective plan outlining continuity procedures, audit resumption, and termination safeguards. 3. Authorized signatory, yours or theirs, acknowledging the file correction. I could almost hear Greg pacing like a rat in a heating duct. Somewhere in that polished conference room, legal was probably holding up their hands muttering about due process. Curtis was still trying to memorize OSHA acronyms, and Nadine from HR was preparing her patented brand of panicked oblivion. Well, maybe if we just call it a promotion. Nope. The policy was suspended, not terminated, not canceled, suspended. That's how the carrier plays it when they know the client's too big to lose but too dumb to trust. It's the equivalent of a parental will wait. And now everyone would wait. For me, I didn't gloat, didn't blast it on LinkedIn or text any coworkers a smug little told you so. But I did let the smile happen. Not big, not showy, just a quiet twitch of the mouth. A small, clean breath in a week full of noise. At 3:47 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, Greg didn't bother with the blocked number. He called from his office line. Too rattled to keep up appearances, too desperate to play coy. I let it ring twice before picking up, long enough for him to sweat. Hey, he said, syrupy now. That weaponized corporate sweetness that oozes from people who just realize they're standing on the wrong end of a barrel. Listen, just a quick thing. We've got a little hiccup. Nothing huge, just some admin stuff with the carrier. They're being dramatic. You know how they are. I didn't respond. Let the silence hold like a blade. So, we just need a quick sign-off from you. Nothing major, just to keep things moving, help the team out. There it was. The pivot from you're the 148K failure to we're all in this together. I wondered if he even heard himself. Probably not. I exhaled once. No. No? His tone cracked, like it had never occurred to him I might not play along. No, Greg, you fired me on camera, in public, without notice. You invalidated your own coverage and tried to backdate it. That's not a hiccup. That's malpractice. More silence. Then the sound of his sleeve brushing the phone mic as he tried to regroup. Okay, maybe that wasn't ideal, but let's be reasonable. Just help us file the fix. You know the language, you've got the trust. I smiled, but it didn't reach my voice. Sure, on my terms. He choked out a laugh. Terms? You want your coverage active before the 5 p.m. Serona clause hits, right? That shipment on Dock 6 doesn't move until they get a clean COI. That clock's ticking, Greg. Penalty starts at 5 sharp. 25K per hour, isn't it? I could almost hear his eyes widen. How do you even... You think I didn't track our top 3 contracts before you fired me? I've seen that clause. Sirona doesn't play with suppliers who fumble risk signatories. Their penalties come with teeth and lawyers. I let that sink in before laying it out. My terms are simple. 1. 90-day consulting retainer at my former rate. 2. Full indemnity clause for any risk exposure caused during the lapse. 3. Clean HR record. No termination language, no blame, no HR footnotes. And 4. New policy language signed by the board. No one alters the DR officer role without formal board vote and written notice to legal and North River. I could hear his mouth working, struggling to find leverage where there was none. Greg, I said, low and calm, you want me to save the company from the mistake you made. That comes at a price. One you'll pay, or one the board will. He didn't respond. But 30 minutes later, my inbox chimed with a Zoom invite. Subject: Emergency board session, 4:30 p.m. I joined muted. They were already in chaos. Legal was red-eyed and stiff. Logistics was panicking over Sirona's hold. Finance had the numbers in front of them. Projected penalties, frozen revenue, cascading SLA failures. Greg tried to frame it as an unfortunate oversight. I unmuted once. The oversight, I said, was thinking you could cut risk without triggering it. And then I dropped my document in the chat. A 2-page remediation agreement signed on my side, ready for theirs. It was 4:38 p.m. They had 22 minutes to choose. Accept or bleed. They started the board meeting like it wasn't already a funeral. Everyone speaking in clipped tones, like maybe if they kept their voices low enough, the fines wouldn't hear them. Greg looked like he'd aged 6 years since yesterday, which frankly felt low. I joined by phone. Not video. Let them sit with that. Let them imagine the expression on my face while they squirmed under LED lighting and the weight of their own negligence. The board chair, Ellen, cleared her throat like it hurt. We're here to authorize a temporary reinstatement of Ms. Langley as external designated risk officer to fulfill policy requirements and restore suspended coverage. This vote is limited in scope and duration, 24 hours. They voted, unanimous. Even Greg's box lit green. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yesterday I was a cost center. Today I was the brake pedal they suddenly remembered came with the vehicle. Ava from North River was already on the call, audio only, like a judge waiting to sign the warrant. We'll proceed once the corrective plan is submitted, she said. Flat. No embellishments, just process. I liked her more every time she spoke. I uploaded the document into the shared compliance portal while Ellen read from the agenda like she could outrun the clock. The file was exactly 9 lines long. Loss control audits resume under prior cadence. Incident routing reinstated per 2023 schema. Successor DR officer to be vetted by board vote. Termination protocol requires 10-day notice and board sign-off. COI updates restricted to verified signatories only. Corrective measures logged for carrier access. Training modules reissued to operations leads. Compliance backups mirrored to off-site archive. DR officer removal triggers temporary suspension clause acknowledgement. Nothing dramatic, nothing inflated, just structure and accountability, the very things they tried to cut when they cut me. Ava took exactly 43 seconds to read it. Acknowledged, she said. Coverage status will shift to active, conditional upon signatory execution. I e-signed in the carrier portal. The line flipped green. Trucks could roll. Clients would breathe. The penalty clock stopped at 4:56 p.m., 4 minutes to spare, and in that silence, I didn't hear thank yous, didn't expect them. What I heard was paper moving, chairs shifting, legal muttering about clawbacks, Greg clicking through tabs, probably trying to check if he still had a job by the end of the call. My reinstatement was just that, paper. A name on a line to stop a bleed. But it wasn't nothing. It was a knife I'd handed them handle first. Clean, professional, unshakable. And they'd felt the edge just enough to know it could have gone another way. At 5:02 p.m., I clicked one final checkbox in the carrier portal. Confirmation window popped up. Sign to activate policy. I signed. The screen blinked, then updated. Status. Active. Conditional corrective plan in place. That's how insurers phrase "you blew it, but someone competent showed up in time." 5 minutes later, Sirona Labs logistics lead replied to the updated certificate of insurance with a dry confirmed. Delivery window resumes, trucks inbound. No emojis, no fanfare, just salvation. quiet and sterile, exactly how Greg had once described me to another VP when I pushed back on cutting our fireproof server cabinets. She's thorough, but not exactly inspiring. Now that uninspiring woman had just saved them from a 7-figure hemorrhage, and no one in that boardroom was celebrating. They were calculating. I watched it play out from my laptop in a bathrobe, sipping reheated coffee like it was champagne. Greg tried to pivot, again, threw out phrases like cross-functional solutioning and rapid remediation cycles, hoping if he said it fast enough, no one would remember he was the arsonist in this little fire drill. Didn't work. Legal pinged the board mid-call with a private summary of the policy lapse report. Ava's language was cold. Preventable lapse due to improper termination of required officer. Temporary reinstatement required to avoid breach of active client contracts. That's all the board needed. The phrase preventable lapse is a poison pill in Greg's contract. I helped write the risk language when they expanded our director protections last year. A lapse caused by his own decision triggers full clawback of his Q2 performance bonus. I don't know the exact number, but I know it came with a comma and a Tesla brochure. The directors started doing what directors do: counting, votes, blame, exit routes. HR was already drafting language. Resigned to pursue other opportunities, probably. The great American euphemism for "we can't afford to fire you" out loud. Meanwhile, the board passed a motion to amend the company SOPs. New clause: any proposed change to endorsement 14B signatory requires full board oversight, minimum 10-day notice, and compliance attestation. A copy of the new language popped into my inbox. They asked me to review it for clarity. Not approval, let's not get wild, but clarity. I highlighted one section, added a comment. Specify that interim appointments do not bypass the notice requirement. It was accepted in less than 60 seconds. Quiet triumph is a strange feeling. It's not joy, it's not even pride. It's just the steady thump of reality falling into place. No one clapped, no one cried. But the trucks rolled, the fines stopped, the policy held. And the man who called me a waste of $148K had just cost them nearly triple that in a single afternoon. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I just felt still. There was a small grief in it. Not for Greg, not for the board, for the years I spent giving them everything: precision, caution, loyalty, only to be dismissed like a line item. But grief isn't a weakness. It's the receipt, proof that you invested something real. And today, they finally paid the bill. The final call came on a Thursday evening, the kind where the sky turns nickel gray and every tree looks like it's holding its breath. It was the last official meeting, me, the board, legal, Ava from North River, and Greg's seat conspicuously empty. He'd resigned that morning with a 2-line memo and a slumped walk past the loading dock. No send-off, no cake, just a cardboard box and the echo of his own arrogance. The board chair started the call like we were old friends. We'd like to formally thank you for your exceptional stewardship during a very challenging event. I could hear the edge in her voice. The shame of knowing they'd picked the wrong horse and tried to break the one that actually pulled the cart. Then came the pitch. We'd be honored to welcome you back in a permanent capacity. I let it hang. 3 seconds, then 5. Then I smiled and answered evenly, no. Ellen flinched. Legal coughed. Ava didn't react, just watched silently, probably already updating the account file to reflect the inevitable. I'll maintain the retainer through the quarter, I added. After that, I'm stepping back. I've selected a successor. I'll train her personally. She reads the footnotes. They accepted. Not out of generosity, out of necessity. I was the only one who could flip the switch back to stable, but I wasn't going to spend another year patching a ship that fires its welders mid-storm. I wanted closure, not an encore. Then I handed them the final clause. 9 clean lines in the revised DR officer protocol with one buried gem. Any unauthorized modification, replacement, or termination of the designated risk officer without written board notice and carrier acknowledgement shall nullify executive indemnification for decisions made during the lapse. In simpler terms, if you cut the mechanic again without checking the manual, you're paying your own damn legal fees. Legal read it twice. Ava said, "That's reasonable." The board voted it through without argument, and that was it. The call ended. I shut my laptop and stood in the quiet, letting the stillness settle into my bones like warm water. I didn't cry, didn't toast. I just walked over to my office wall and straightened the frame. Inside, it was my original appointment certificate, authorized signatory, designated risk officer, Loring Industrial Systems. I'd crossed out the company name with a red felt pen and added one word below it: retired. People think control looks like shouting, or suits, or emails that start with "per my last message." But real control? It's writing the rules that outlast the ones who break them. They called me overhead. Turns out, I was the brakes.